Donald Trump tried to use state legislatures to overturn the 2020 election. Now the United States Supreme Court could help him set the stage for round two.
The Supreme Court said it would take up a case called Moore v. Harper, a case that should keep us all up at night.
People that I follow who are not people given to hyperbole or panic sound panicked about the fact the court has taken this case.
Republican extremists who want to undermine and unravel American democracy have had state legislatures in their crosshairs. And this election cycle, they've learned from previous mistakes. If we don't want Republicans' unmatched power in state legislatures to also become unchecked power, we need Democrats to rebuild and hold majorities in their state houses. But first, we need to vote for them. In 2020, Democrats won control of the House and the Senate. The margins were razor thin, but it was a moment of celebration. But then bill after bill was stalled, blocked, or killed thanks to Republicans and America's least favorite Joe. Better was not built back, voting rights were not agreed on, and abortion was not codified. Momentum was starting to feel hard to come by, at least on the federal level. But state legislatures haven't had the same deadlocking problem. They've introduced and passed legislation on voting, abortion, guns, public health, education, and more. Combined with a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, state governments are starting to steer the country's most critical national concerns. Which means, even if they're listed on page 2 or 3 or 4 of your ballot, down-ballot elections like your state senator and representatives are more important than ever.
I love down-ballot races. There's over 500,000 elected offices in this country, and the vast majority of them are down-ballot.
This is Lala Wu. She is the co-founder of Sister District Project, an organization that builds progressive power in state legislatures. Since 2016, they've been bringing attention to these often overlooked races.
We've been obsessed with state legislatures because we understand the outsized importance that they have on every issue that we care about. From abortion to climate change to guns to education to democracy itself.
88 of the country's 99 state legislative chambers are up for election this midterm. Of those 99 chambers, Republicans currently control 61 and Democrats control just 37. For several states, voters will decide which party controls their state legislature, and Democrats have the chance to flip some legislatures from red to blue. Democrats will also need to fight to hold their majorities in other battleground states. Win or lose, the results of these battleground races will be close for both Democrats and Republicans. And by close, we mean really close. Some of these majorities have been decided by just a single vote, a coin toss, even picking names out of a hat. While that might sound odd, and believe me, it definitely is, what this means is that these races, these majorities are very, very winnable.
This is really where the power is, and it's the most strategic place to be spending our time and resources.
Even though they're local offices, voters aren't often familiar with their state legislatures, who they are, or what they do. In 2018, a Johns Hopkins study found that fewer than 20% of the people that they surveyed could name their state legislators. So let's introduce you to some.
My name is Ricky Hurtado. I'm running for the North Carolina House District 63.
My name is Jessica Katzenmeyer, and I am running for Wisconsin State Senate District 5.
I'm Laura Terech, and I am running for the State House in Legislative District 4 here in Arizona.
What is a state legislature? For me, I certainly didn't know growing up, right? And I feel like many people are disconnected from state legislatures. But the more you learn, the more you realize that it's probably the most important body in our democracy, not just in North Carolina, but across the nation.
Think of a state legislature like Congress, with the upper chamber, the Senate, and the lower chamber, the House of Representatives, but for every single state. Like their federal equivalents, state legislators attend committees, meet with constituents, draft legislation, and vote on bills. You remember the song.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
These are the legislating bodies that make and pass laws that are then signed by the governor or vetoed by the governor.
Meaning the governor effectively serves as the president of the state. They just address more niche concerns.
These are really the laws that impact people most day to day. It's as local as your traffic, the quality of your roads, the teacher pay, how the energy grid is going to look in your state.
TV stations, news sites, even Twitter are often buzzing with things happening at the federal level. But in our day-to-day, what happens at the state and local levels often is what impacts us the most.
All of the foundational power to our community starts at the state legislature.
And with this smaller scale comes greater accessibility as well.
Think about your congressional district. I mean, that's a huge group of people. Whereas if you're talking about your state legislature, those districts are much smaller.
Think about Washington and complain about Congress, but the action is really in the state capitals across our nation. We should be showing up at our state capitals every day to make sure that our state representatives know what we want to see.
You really can have a personal relationship with your elected officials, and you should.
State legislators are elected by popular vote. They serve a smaller pool of voters and are actually members of the districts that they serve. You might just see them at the grocery store or have the same dry cleaner. You'll see them out and about.
At the end of the day, each vote, each constituent is actually the bedrock of our democracy.
And yet, the coverage of local state offices is severely lacking, as is voter enthusiasm.
I know that there seems to be a lot of people out there who will vote in the presidential election year, but they don't vote in a midterm election year. These races are just as important.
Well, it's probably more accurate to say that enthusiasm for these down-ballot races isn't evenly split. Republicans have quietly grown their unmatched control of state legislatures over 4 decades.
There's a deep philosophical difference. Republicans have been talking about building power at all levels, and they talk a lot about local power and state power, and it's baked into their vocabulary and their understanding of what civic engagement is. And unfortunately, Democrats have really paid a little too much attention relatively to the top of the ticket.
What Lala's pointing out here is the down-ballot roll-off issue that Democratic voters have each election day.
Down-ballot roll-off is where a voter starts at the top of the ticket but doesn't vote all the way down. So, for example, a voter might vote for Biden, and then maybe they'll vote for their Senate candidate and maybe their congressional candidate, but then they decide to stop voting.
Sister District Project has been studying down-ballot roll-off to better understand how often incomplete ballots are submitted by party, and even worse, shaping our state elections.
What we found is that the vast majority of the time, the Democratic candidates at the top of the ticket, that's candidates for president, governors, and Senate, they received more votes than the Democratic state legislative candidates.
What shocked researchers the most was that almost the opposite appears to be true for Republican top-of-ticket candidates.
More often than not, actually received fewer votes than the Republican state legislative counterparts. What this tells us is that there is a huge difference between how Democratic-leaning voters and Republican-leaning voters vote.
Republicans aren't just voting down ballot, these offices are motivating Republican voters to vote. And Democrats are making these inevitable wins even easier. But these outcomes are entirely avoidable. Democrats already have the ability to win these races.
In Michigan, in 2020, all we would have needed to flip the Michigan State House was about another 8,600 votes across the entire state. There were 137,000 people in Michigan in 2020 who voted for Biden, but who didn't vote for the Democratic State House candidate.
Now, ballots are secret, so we can't know exactly how voters voted, just that there's a discrepancy in vote counts by party. But it's likely that a lot of these Biden voters who didn't vote for the Democratic State House candidate already leaned Democratic. They just didn't bubble in their State House choice. And this isn't a problem exclusive to Michigan.
My running mate, Senator Marsh, she ran in 2018 and she lost by 267 votes. And when you look at the size of our district and how many precincts there are, that comes down to a couple of dozen votes per precinct.
Laura Terech has the opportunity to flip a chamber of the state legislature in Arizona, the battleground state with the largest percentage of election-subverting Republican legislators.
We are only 1 seat away in the state house and the state senate to either a tie or a majority for the first time since 1966, which would be huge for Arizonans, and that path runs right through our district. That will not happen unless I win this seat.
Jessica Katzenmeyer's district in Wisconsin is considered to be one of the most competitive state senate races in the country.
This district is rated as a D+1, meaning a Democrat's likely to win by 1 percentage point.
That means Jessica's race could be shaped by single votes. The margins may be small, but her race's outcome will have a large impact on Wisconsin.
Republicans in our state Senate, they are one seat of a net gain away from having a supermajority in the state Senate. That means the governor's veto power would be taken away.
North Carolina, a state plagued by unconstitutional gerrymandering issues, also has a razor-thin margin before the legislature becomes a Republican supermajority.
In North Carolina, we are 3 House seats away from our Democratic governor, Governor Cooper, from losing his veto if Democrats fall into the super minority in the state House of Representatives. And that means that a lot of extremist legislation would be able to be pushed through.
As the incumbent in his district's race, Representative Hurtado is all too familiar with how close these races can be.
I'm serving my first term and won my election in 2020 by 477 votes.
What's the actual vote difference?
1%.
So I flipped the district from red to blue and was the first person to do that in close to 10 years.
So anytime anyone says to me, oh, my vote doesn't matter, it absolutely does. It's so important that people vote this midterm election. We need every single vote.
And why do we need every single vote? Republican-led state legislatures have been signaling that we've only just seen the beginning of their bans and restrictions.
We recognize that the new front lines of reproductive rights is at the state legislature. We've already seen clear signs from both the House and the Senate that abortion bans are on the agenda in 2023.
State legislatures have the power to shape our state laws for the worse, but they also have the power to expand our rights.
In California, for example, as well as in Michigan, there is a constitutional amendment that is on the ballot this fall that would enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution.
When Democrats have secured a Democratic trifecta, when both chambers and the governor of a state are held by Democrats, there's progress we aren't seeing on the federal level.
Virginia is an incredible example. They were able to pass their own voting rights legislation, which we were not able to do in Congress. They were able to abolish the death penalty, become the first state in the South to do so, to legalize recreational marijuana, to increase teacher pay, to commit to greenhouse gas reductions.
Unfortunately, Democrats lost control of the Virginia governorship and the legislature in 2021. And we need these Democratic strongholds. Take recent federal wins like the climate provisions passed in Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Without state officials who are on board with these policies, how can we expect that they'll be executed successfully? Put simply, these majorities matter.
These are important democracy battlegrounds because the state legislators that we elect this year are the ones that are going to hold the fate of the presidential election in their hands in 2024 and whether we will be able to continue to have free and fair elections.
Donald Trump and his allies tried to overthrow the 2020 election with the help of state legislatures. Fortunately, key state officials, some of them Republicans, fought back, and our democracy held. But that corrupt legacy lives on in the new slate of candidates running for office. Even more terrifying, the legal conspiracy theory at the center of Trump's election subversion scheme will now be part of upcoming oral arguments before the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court is hearing a case called Moore versus Harper. They are going to look at the independent state legislature theory, which is a fringe far-right legal theory that does not deserve its day in court.
Independent state legislature theory essentially hinges on a reinterpretation of two constitutional clauses. This means state legislatures would have exclusive and complete authority over elections, even federal ones. It would forbid any other office like the governor or state Supreme Courts from intervening.
That means that they could pass all manner of election subversion, of voter suppression. They could pass the most gerrymandered maps we've ever seen, and not even their own state courts or state constitutions could do anything about it.
This unprecedented fringe theory would essentially dissolve checks and balances on a state level.
In its most extreme interpretation, it could even allow state legislatures to put their own presidential electors forward, regardless of the popular vote, effectively nullifying it.
And that's a devastating possibility because at their core, state legislatures have the potential to not only better represent the will of the voters in elections, but they're also uniquely positioned to elect officials who better represent the increasingly diverse makeup of U.S. voters.
It's so critical for us to help to build a reflective democracy. And that means a democracy where our elected representatives represent and reflect the diversity of all of us. And that means racial diversity, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, everything.
I was actually the first Latino Democrat to ever win an election in North Carolina.
Jess Katzenmeyer made history with her run for office.
I've already made history with this race. I am the first transgender woman to run for state senate in the history of Wisconsin, and we beat a two-time congressional candidate by nearly 10 points in a primary. And I think the voters really spoke that they want to change. They want somebody who's going to be a voice for them.
The US is supposed to have a representative democracy, but historically, political offices haven't proportionally represented its constituents.
We designed America and this democracy to serve not the few of us, but the all of us. We have yet to achieve this vision, but this potential is there, and we can only achieve it if we actually elect a diverse and reflective democracy.
Beyond my district, I also represent 1 million plus Latinos who feel like they finally have a voice in North Carolina. So it's been such an honor to be the only Spanish speaker in the General Assembly and talk to constituents who felt that they've never actually had a connection to state legislature. So I'm fighting not just for my district, but for our community here across North Carolina to make sure that we're building a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive state.
These races are so important, and when a single vote can tip the scale, there are real consequences for leaving them blank on your ballot. Races for state legislature are more accessible, winnable, and cost-effective investments, and your vote goes further.
These races are often much smaller, much more inexpensive, and easier to get involved in. So, for example, a state legislative race often costs 10 times less than a congressional race. If you've got $20 to donate or 10 hours to phone bank in a year, that is going to go a lot further for these down ballot races than it does for something at the top of the ticket.
Democrats need to get excited about voting down ballot this midterm because these are the elections that really impact our daily lives the most.
Voting is the building block of our democracy. If we don't vote, there is no democracy.
There is simply too much on the line to lose these elections, not because of candidate performance, proposed policies, political ads, or debates, but because Democratic voters who were already voting handed in an incomplete ballot.
It's not just about winning races, of course. If we, as Democratic voters, don't vote all the way down the ticket, it means that we're basically relinquishing our ability to put the people that we want and who share our values into office. That means there's going to be fewer pro-choice legislators. There's going to be fewer pro-climate legislators.
And democracy isn't something we can take for granted. If we don't use this power, we could very well lose it.